All right, so we're beginning here with research methods. And we're going to look at two different categories of research, qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative research is also known as explorative research often. It is defined as collecting qualitative information, in other words, information that is not necessarily in numeric form, to explore people's feelings about. Could be a company, a product, an advertisement, a logo, whatever, right? So the purpose is to explore. An example would be exploring your feelings about the layout design of our class website by asking you to write a few sentences about your opinion of it. You might want to pause the video here just to write down the 4 types of qualitative research, and we will look at each more fully in a bit. Now, quantitative research is defined as collecting data in numeric form. The purpose may be to describe or compare or look for relationships and or seek cause and effect relationships. So again, the purpose may be 4 different things, right? It could be to describe or to compare or to look for relationships or to seek cause and effect relationships or causal information, you might say. For instance, we might describe our class by what percentage of students are in different sections of the U.S. That would be defining our class, right? Describing it. Also, when our data is in numeric form, it allows us to compare. So we can look for relationships, we can seek cause and effect, we can compare. And for one example, that if we computed the mean GPA of the students in our class, we collected that quantitative data. We can then compare it with the mean for other classes. Again, you might want to pause the video here just to write down the 3 types of quantitative research, and we will also look at each of those more fully in a bit. So starting with the first type of qualitative research, the focus group. Focus groups consist of usually 8 to 12 people and a moderator. Participants are screened, meaning that those who are not in the target market for a product, for instance, are screened out. The purpose of focus groups is to explore people's feelings about a company or logo or product or advertisement, or just have them maybe brainstorm ideas for improvements on a product or a new product, etc. A skilled moderator works to assure that all voices are heard, that one person will not dominate the conversation, and that the group keeps on track. But the skilled part means that they do all of this with the least amount of involvement possible. They want the conversation to feel like it's between the focus group members, not that they are a part of the group. Focus groups involve scripted, predetermined questions. However, the moderator does have some flexibility to explore something particularly interesting that might come up. Focus groups usually last about 2 hours or longer. In-depth interviews is our second kind of qualitative research. In-depth interviews are one-on-one, and they can last anywhere from an hour to much longer. A skilled moderator presents participants with specific verbal and or visual materials. So it could be a mock-up of an ad campaign or a picture of a logo, etc. The moderator's job, again, is to minimize his or her own talking time, to provide as much time as possible for the consumer to express his or her thoughts. Compared to focus groups, in-depth interviews are relatively unstructured and unscripted. In-depth interviews are even more timely and expensive, though, than focus groups, because they are one-on-one, so the company must pay for all that skilled moderator time and each individual's time. Our third type of qualitative data are projective techniques. Projective techniques encourage respondents to project their unconscious beliefs, unconscious attitudes, unconscious feelings, unconscious interpretations, whatever, right? Something unconscious about the company or the product or the logo. And they do this through ambiguous scenarios. So here's 4 kind of fun examples that are often used to study consumer issues using a projective technique. The first one is word association tests. So this should be reviewed from Psych 101, Freud's free association, right? This is where you give the consumer a word and they respond as quickly as possible in an attempt to reveal unconscious associations. Okay. Completion tests are also ambiguous kinds of scenarios. The consumer is presented with incomplete sentences or incomplete stories and asked to complete them. Now, construction tests. With these, the consumer is asked to fill in speech or thought bubbles in pictures of characters interacting with a product or viewing a logo, etc., right? That's a kind of fun one. And then expressive tests. The consumer is asked to role play typical others' opinions and or interactions with a product, for example. So let me think of a good example of a projective technique. Old Spice deodorant used a projective technique by asking respondents, by telling them to use their best guess or their best intuition, to describe a typical user of Old Spice and typical users of other brands. So that's an example of a projective technique. And those are the 4 kinds. And they are searching for unconscious associations, right? Now, the last one under qualitative research, number 4, is the observation. An observation is when researchers observe and record consumers' behavior with or without consumers' knowledge. Now, when it is with consumers' knowledge, it's called an obtrusive observation. And it's called that because your known presence may actually obtrude upon, in other words, change the consumer's behavior. As an example, a company called Innovations Focus was interested in learning about how women use lipstick. And they actually had their researchers attend Mary Kay in-home makeup parties to observe and record women using lipstick. Do you think the women changed how they used their lipstick because they knew they were being watched? Possibly, right? When an observation is conducted without consumers' knowledge, it is called an unobtrusive observation because there is not a risk of intruding upon, in other words, changing consumers' behavior by your presence. As an example, Procter & Gamble sends researchers into grocery stores to casually pretend they're consumers and casually observe how long you look at their products, or how many of their products you examine, or where your attention is focused when you pick up one of their products. Is it on the ounces, or is it on the nutrition label, for example? You know, another example of unobtrusive observation is when stores use their security cameras to track consumer traffic. For instance, sometimes they do to identify where traffic jams are occurring, spread out those more popular items more. Sometimes they do to identify slow browse areas to plant impulse items. When we come back in our next segment, we're going to look at quantitative research.